thoughts or questions, please feel free to share. Well, I'll say that on behalf of Pastor. Feel free to share them, and we'll gladly talk about them next week too as we continue to navigate this idea of family. But we'll start with Exodus chapter 20, and we'll read verse 12 in the NIV. It reads, "Honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you." And so, we kind of always start with this idea of context and what context really brings to the text. So we talked about this a few weeks ago when we were dealing with what Jesus says to the Pharisees. And is this specifically to the Pharisees, or is this something that everyone is supposed to take something from in the text? And so is this specifically a word for the Israelites as the Ten Commandments are being written, or is this something for everyone?
I do believe it is a word for everyone, though given specifically to Israel as they're leaving Egypt. And I think that is an important distinction and note to make. They have been in bondage for over 400 years, and when they went into Egypt, they were 70 people. Some scholars suggest we're talking about over 1.2 million people leaving now. And so they go from being a large family going into Egypt to a nation leaving. And they've not had opportunity to figure out what their society ought to look like.
Yeah, okay.
And so I think sometimes when we look at God's command to Israel, and it does get tricky because some stuff ain't got nothing to do with us. Right? And so we apply it, but it really has nothing to do with us. There's some in terms of it being prescriptive, right? There's some things that, particularly within the Old Testament, even within the New Testament, that are good examples, that are good models, but doing the thing like they do it isn't always going to reap the outcome that they reap, right? So you can, say the Lord told you to go for a walk, and wherever you put your foot is yours, and no, that's somebody's property. Somebody owns that, and it's also problematic in the text. But that's not tonight's conversation.
Yeah, and so then to that point, this is really more so, as you said, about navigating how to be a nation, how to be a people together. Not so much about this like plug and play kind of what's the word I'm looking for? This like solution. It's not a problem set, but we're really just trying to figure out how do we work together as community, how do we live together as a nation, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. So that's why you have to establish rules and laws. While there are 10 commandments here specifically, God gives all sorts of commands about how we should treat neighbors, how we should treat community, and then he also talks about, now, if you do commit an act against someone, this is how you make restoration. When we start talking about the 10 Commandments specifically, 4 of them deal with our relationship with God. 5 of them deal with our relationship with one another. 1 of them has to do with us as individuals. That God recognizes, hey, I need you to approach me a certain way, but I also need you to approach one another a certain way.
Okay.
And a part of that is honor your mother and your father. Whether or not it means everything we have turned it into, I would say it probably doesn't, but it does help us understand and underscore the need to see parental relationships as different and as special, right? Because the Bible points us to parental relationships because it is for Israel. That is how we discover who God is. It is how we discover what love looks like and how to approach God. It is the relationship with God was much more generational and passed on than what we typically think of today, right? So God is not just God, right? He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? It is passed on relationship, and so people don't come to an understanding of God by themselves. It really relies on their parents to help shape. It is how Cain and Abel know to bring offering, even though the text never says and God never commands it, right? So the parental relationship is hard. It's hard for us to kind of place 2026 realities on the text, but recognizing that nope, there is no older relationship that we'll ever have with anybody on the planet than we have with our parents.
Yeah, and that is an interesting point, right? And we've been talking about this too in seminary Saturday with the book that we've been reading in my grandmother's house, right? That like this idea of passed down theology, as you were kind of talking about, right? That like the Israelites get to know God through their family line, like they get to connect through history, and that is a way, right, in which the Black church has also gotten to know God, and the way that the Black church has also gotten to talk about theology and to know who God is because it's been passed down from generation to generation through the family line. And I think that this is a good text for us to think about, right, what it means to pass down the knowledge of God. In part of trying to walk and navigate in understanding honor is also understanding like what we're learning from our parental units or from the parental people in our lives, that there's a lot to be offered to us from them, while also figuring out how we navigate those relationships as not just as adults, but right. And I think particularly when we think about this text, it's about right like adult parents, children, right? Like not adult parents and adult children. So how do we think about this text as adults who are children of parents?
Yeah, and so my read of the text, and this could be the older I get, but as Moses is giving the law, he would be talking to what we would probably call young adults, or certainly those who are in our society would be in their 30s, right? People who are starting off in life, the able-bodied, employed, those who are going to be taking on the bulk of the responsibility, as he is also giving, right, context, right, as he's also giving instruction on build this tabernacle every day, take it down every day, able-bodied folks who would be doing manna collection, who would be doing quail collection, somebody's got to grab this water, all of those things. So there are elderly, and it is for me the idea. Well, we'll just go ahead, and this honor is not obey, right? This honor is really don't leave behind, right? As they have this journey from wilderness, from through the wilderness to the promised land. This is God saying, don't you forget. Don't think because they're slower you get to leave them behind, right? Don't forsake them, because it is never God's intention for us to have tension within our relationships with our parents, right? The parental-child relationship, in my estimation, to God is sacred. It is why, the Father talks to the Son in the way that he does when Jesus comes on the scene, right? And so it's important. So we are really talking about these transitional years. And is there any harder time than when we're becoming adults in our own right to have parents who continue to want to be the authoritative parent and example in our lives?
Okay, then. So what I hear you saying is that this is about how we care, right, for this older generation. It's definitely about how we care for them, how we find respect and appreciation, and we don't leave them behind. I think that's an interesting point, right, particularly as you think about this as adults who are still children of adult parents, right, that like as our lives go on, that there is this call, right, that we get in the commandments to not forget like our parents and what they did and how they've helped to grow and shape us, which is an interesting thing, particularly in this individualistic society that kind of you go to college and you leave at 18 and you're an adult, right, and you kind of go off into the world, and so it's interesting to think about this as an idea of no, but you still have a responsibility to care for them, not necessarily to obey, as you pointed out, but there is this responsibility and this call to care for your elders, to care for those people. So I'm curious if you can kind of help us think about what does care look like if not obedience?
Yeah, sometimes care has to look like I can't fool with you today,
Yeah.
right? It really is, and I think within Black culture in particular, I think that we have obligations, and we really carry a level of responsibility and obligation to our parents as they age. And it's not suggesting that it is wrong, but I do think Scripture provides for us a larger context. And unfortunately, we read this Exodus passage in isolation without taking a look at, well, how else does the Scripture remind us that children and parents ought get along? I think care looks like a whole lot of things, but it is often based upon, and this is where adult children get into some tension, is what if my parent was raggedy? Right? So what does care look like when, right? Because ultimately, the easier aspect of things to do is if your parents are old and they were kind and good to you, then you'll make sure that they're taken care of. You can move on in with me, all of that kind of stuff. I've got 5 older brothers, and I've told both of my parents, y'all can move in with somebody else.
Fair.
I'm not the one. Yeah. My mama can move in. My dad has got there's a junior in the family. He can move in over there, right? But I do think that care becomes difficult, and we have to figure out how to separate and handle and relieve and deal with the tension of how my relationship with our parents has gone versus how I need to treat them moving forward, right? Because having a child doesn't make you automatically a good parent.
Yeah, that's true.
People just had some folks just had kids, and you like, well, and so God wants us, and so we're born into this relationship that I think the Scripture kind of encourages, that it's supposed to be a nurturing, loving one that provides a supportive environment. And I don't know how many folks can say that's the type of relationship that they grew up with.
Yeah. Which is a good point. We'll talk about it next week too, right? As we think about what it really looks like to be a parent, right? So as we kind of are looking at this child side of the conversation, next week we're going to jump into the parenting part and how we do this. And I think it's very interesting, right, that you dealt with this idea of authoritative parenting, particularly in Black parenting spaces, and how that is an interesting road to navigate as we get older, and navigating this idea of care even outside of what is no longer authoritative, right? And I think that, we'll deal with it, but I think that it's an interesting thing to think about. How do we care for parents who only want to be authority figures instead of actually being parents or being friends or whatever that is? And I'm curious if you can kind of help us from a pastoral point to think about how do we walk through those spaces in which we want to do the caring, but the parent wants obedience.
Listen, parenting should change over time. I am 45 years old. One of the things that is always interesting to me is, and they both watch Bible studies, so I'm probably going to be in a look. But if I can use Malachi's example, then I figure I can use my parents as an example. My parents expect me every time I go out of town to text them and let them know I got this say.
Yeah.
I'm fully grown, right? Like it is. The last time I went on vacation, I'm in day 3 of vacation. My mama calls me ain't nobody told me you was going out of town. Why I got to hear on the streets? I'm like, what streets? Marcus called you and told you that I was right. Parenting changes over time, and when parents don't adjust and adapt, then it becomes a little bit tense, because you're born into a relationship that is built on parents' complete authority over your life, and you eat what they tell you to eat, you go where they tell you to go, right? So your entire life is subject to their authority, and unfortunately, often unchecked authority often leads to abuse, and that is not to suggest that every parent is abusive. That's just the reality of humanity, right? And so because we grow up and we're born under our parents' complete authority, it often creates parents, not mine, hey, Mom, not y'all, that don't like to be challenged.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't want to hear another point of view because we're not far removed from generations of parents that didn't have authority anywhere else. So I'm the boss at home. And how many of us have heard our parents say, no matter how old you are, I'm still your dad.
Yeah.
Right? No matter how old you are, I'm still your mom. And that is true. But I don't need the authority figure. And so parenting, from a biblical perspective, is balancing authority and influence, which shifts and changes with time and maturity. The older Malachi gets, the more I recognize that there's some decisions I need him to make. I've told him, I used to make every decision for you, and I didn't. And then we grew to a stage where I wanted you to make the choice, but you had to make the choice I wanted you to make, right? And non-consequential stuff. I want you to brush your teeth. Now, you can pick whichever color toothbrush you want. It really don't make a difference. Now, as he grows and is about to head off to college, I'm like, hey, I'm guardrails for your life.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you make decisions, and when I think you're making the wrong one, I'm just here to make sure that you don't fall too far off course, right? My influence over his life will continue to adjust, but I always hope that as he grows up, as I mature, hopefully as a parent and evolve as a person, that I can get to a space where I'll always be guardrails, because I think that's what parents are supposed to do, but the lanes will get wider.
Yeah.
And I'll give him the freedom to make choices.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. I know my dad, when I got married, was like, I'm moving into consultant, like person, like I'm no longer here to tell you how to do things or be the person to like soundboard off of. I'm just here to be a consultant in your life. So I'm around when you need me, but if you don't, that's okay too. And I remember that moment in that conversation being a very freeing part of our relationship, because it was okay, you don't necessarily have the same pressures to feel like a child with your parent, right?
Yeah.
And particularly, as a 20-something, you're already striving for so much independence, and so to be told that okay, you can be as independent as you want, but I'm here and around if you need the help was really great. And so I suggest and think that it was a really helpful thing for me, that as parents grow older, and this is what I'm trying to hold for myself. I just have a 5 and a 2-year-old, but still I want to keep that in mind, that as they get to a place in which I trust their decision making, I trust who they are as adults, and I've done all the work that I can just be their consultant, and I don't necessarily have to be. I don't have to hold their hand as much anymore, and we ought get ourselves to a place as parents where we don't feel like we have to hold their hands to be able to make it through the world. And I think that ultimately as people, that's what we want, but sometimes we have a hard time letting go of that hand, right? I mean, in the same way, right, that I can be this way with God, that I trust God to do it, but I still kind of want to be checked in. Just let me know, what are the progress reports, right? How do I hold your hand while you are working on this, God, right? Absolutely. And I think that as parents sometimes too, we can find ourselves in the space where we want to still have the control, because we don't want our babies to get hurt, right? We don't want them to find themselves out in the water too deep. So sometimes that control is great, but when we're 30, we don't necessarily need that same kind of control that you do when you're 5.
Yeah. It's a hard transition to make, right? Because one day they need you for everything, and then the next day they don't need you as much for things. I know I worry. August, I dropped that boy off at somebody's campus. I'm like, dog, who gonna remind you to take your medicine when I'm not around? How does the inhaler gonna be taken if I'm not here to tell you to go through the morning routine? But what blessed me was he went to Costa Rica for 10 days or something like that, and apparently he took his medicine every day. Didn't need to do anything. He got his clothes washed, did all of the stuff. And I'm like, dog, okay, I'm thankful that you're independent. Yeah. You're also pretty lazy around this house if this is what it is. And unfortunately, I think most people, most parents don't shift from authority and influence. They don't strike a different balance. And authority controls, authority, demands, authority punishes. Mm-hmm. Influence explains and builds on relationship. And parents who take the stance that I don't owe you an explanation.
Yeah.
Our parental style, our chosen parental style was we were not going to use any form of laying on of hands. Mm-hmm. And so everything is conversation. And so we were going to talk to him, and what that has produced is a child who wants to talk about everything. Yeah. And so, which is fine, and who also understands there's some things I just need you to do because I said it. And if I tell you, if that is the explanation that I'm giving you, because we have such great relationship and other explanations, he's more willing to accept that as being for his good. But most folks who stick to authority view disagreement as the same as disrespect. That if I don't have the same opinion, then I'm out here being disrespectful.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we talked about this last week, right, with Mary and Jesus, and as you were kind of laying out this idea of moving from authority to influence, I think Mary is a really good example of that biblically. Mm-hmm. That like you have this space in which, right, Mary is the authority figure. Like she's mom, she's doing what she's doing, and even when we see Jesus at the wedding of Cana, that like she tells she tells Jesus to go and do it, and then Jesus is like, well, what am I supposed to do here in this moment? And I think there could have been a moment of tension there, right? Like if she had have not trusted his calling, or if she had have pushed back. But I think to say like do whatever he tells you to do, that she was willing to let go of the reins enough to not be like, listen, like what needs to happen here, right? Like he didn't get snatched up in a way that he absolutely could have gotten snatched up in that parent-child relationship. But I think that she does a great job of being influenced and then kind of walking and following Christ to the point that, right, when Christ gets to the cross, that like he does the work to take care of her because he's done the work of honoring her, right? Yeah. That she has progressed in relationship enough for them to be at a space where they can really work through the honor and respect of relationship and not just this obligation. And I think that's the part that I think we can miss sometimes when we expect obedience. All we get is obligation. We don't actually get this true honor or this true desire to really care, but we're just doing it because we have to.
Right, because I think adult children want to please their parents and be our authentic selves, right? And so figuring out how to do that space, which is why I think God chooses the language that he does. He does not say obey. So look, lean in real close. God is so much God that he says what he means. Throughout the Old Testament, when God wanted to say obey, he said obey. Here he says honor. And that is a different word in both English and in Hebrew. It is not the same. And it is important to know the distinction, because if all you want is my obligated activity, then I'll do it, but I'm not honoring you in it, right? And so you get the activity of my hand, but you never get my heart. And then if you don't have my heart, then it is likely that I don't have respect for you in the way that you want me to. Yeah. And so respect shows up differently, and so I can't honor you because here we are, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting, right, because as you deal with this idea, right, that like if God wanted to say obey, he would have said obey. Particularly, right, because as we think about like he's laying out the 10 Commandments, this is exactly what he wants them to do, right? And he has made it very clear, right? Like you shall have no other gods before me, like you shall keep the Sabbath, like he is very clear and intentional in what he says, and he doesn't use the word obey here. And then when we go into Leviticus, he actually uses the word respect, right? And so I think that there's like an interesting point to like look at how he deals with it in Leviticus. In chapter 19, verse 3, it says, each of you must respect your mother and father, and you must observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God, right? And so that there is this connection right, as we were dealing with earlier, between honor and respect. But then I also think it's interesting that he connects the Sabbath here to this idea of respect and how we care for parents, and the sacredness, right, of what Sabbath is supposed to mean. And so to your point earlier, he's connecting the sacredness of the parent-child relationship also to the sacredness of rest and Sabbath and taking time. So interesting to see honor and respect instead of this idea of obeying.
Of obey. Yeah, and it hits different when you read the Leviticus passage, because it does demonstrate to us that what I find in the Sabbath, I'm also supposed to find in my parental relationship. That the kind of rest and reassurance, the kind of reflection that is supposed to take place, it is the space in which, the Sabbath was the space in which you rehearsed the things of God. And so parents should figure out anybody with children, right, should have figured out at some point, how do I rehearse the things of God to my child so that the honoring becomes easier. When Malachi was small, it's interesting what kids take hold of. I know when I say God supplies my needs, it is God, in him I live, move, and have my being. If it's not him, I don't have the recall, I don't have the capacity. For him, as a 5 and 6 year old, his prayer was, give my parents the strength to go to work, so that there's food in the house,
what I need,
and we got these toys. Like it's not, and so I hope it's different now. But that's how he understood God supply needs back then. And so the idea of what we find in parental relationships, and what is passed on, and how it is passed on. People who are leaving, I think leaving bondage. The other piece is, while the text is unsure, they're stubborn enough to vote not to go into the promised land, right? We're not sure what kind of baggage that they carry. And I think the harder part for us, and for parents, for parents who have living parents still, for adults who are trying to care for and even if not care for, because they're independent, who are trying to navigate relationship with parents, finding that balance, respect, but when we're not allowed to have adult relationships, it often causes some divide in it all. And so, the number of folks who are adults who have tense relationship with their parents, to the extent that I just don't talk to them. Or I have to limit my engagement, or I have to set up a fence around it and make sure that I have barriers, because and that can be hard. And so sometimes our parents are just closed-minded, right? They know a way to do a thing. I thought my parents were always fairly open-minded until I had a child, and then no matter what I did, it was wrong. My mother was great in providing relief. But you can never have too many clothes on the kid.
Right, like you don't know anything. Like, you've
not
never
a
been
bit.
a parent before.
The baby got a cough. Malachi was sick. We had to take him to the doctor. My dad was like, "What you got to take him to the doctor for?" His granddad got that same cough. It's fine. It's not fine. He's 6 months old. You're 70.
Right.
Like this isn't the same.
The immune system is not there, right?
Yeah. So it can be. But I think one of the things that God is challenging them to do is to remember that their parents are human. And sometimes, depending on as a kid, we have certain views of our parents. I don't ever remember my parents not being adults. But my parents, were pretty young to have, such a large family. And, I joke, by the time I came along, they're tired of parenting kids. They're like, hey, y'all figure out.
Right.
Just make sure this one,
right?
make sure this one don't die. Right. It's just, but I think remembering that they are people, and it's hard sometimes because they don't often, they like to present as parent and not as person.
Yeah.
And so we don't know their often what they had to deal with in the workday, whatever struggles or experiences, whatever I think about, just the amount of bad days that you may have, the amount of tension or anxiety that you may experience, and then to have to parent little people. Yeah. No, maybe I don't want you in my business either, right? Like if I had certain struggles or certain things, it's just different. I think now parenting has shifted, not all the way to not that friendship parenting. That's not. We'll talk about that another day. But pastorally, we're not gonna be out here being friends. I do say that to Malachi. I'm not one of your little friends.
Fair. I feel like you can't grow up and not hear that.
Yeah.
That is a necessary thing to hear.
I'm not one of your little friends. But I think, and so we have to figure out, are parents capable of processing their emotions? There are certain expectations that I think that we can put on them that is just beyond their capacity. Not that they're not that they're not intelligent, but going to therapy is new.
Yeah.
New word for black folks, right? It's being in touch with whatever emotional thing that you have going on. Those are newer phenomenons. And so figuring out, honoring them as they have their own baggage, honoring them in their in their own adulthood. Now they can make it easier. They should be able to make it easier. On raising parents is hard.
Yeah.
They don't like to listen. But I think the commandment. So what do I do with the commandment to honor? And I guess this is a question for you. What do I do with a commandment to honor when what comes to me is disrespect? Because parents can be disrespectful.
It's true. Yeah, it's a hard question to navigate, but I think you started touching on this point just a minute ago, right? As we think about the fact that like our parents are human too, like in the same way that we are human. And I wonder if it's a lot. Well, and by I wonder, it's a lot easier for me to understand that now that I am a parent than it was like before I became a parent. Like
Certainly.
there were different expectations I had on my relationship with my parents when I was just their child. But now that I am like their child who also has children, like I see and understand a lot more. And so I think that part of trying to honor when what you get is disrespect is remembering that like that they're human beings too. Like they're learning this in the same way that we remind ourselves to be gentle with new parents because they're figuring out what it means to be the parent of a 1-year-old or a parent of a newborn, right? Like, I mean, for most of our parents, like they're figuring out what it means to be 70 for the first time, right? Or what it means to be 80 and to be aging in a society that does not care about those people who are aging, and doesn't take good care of them. I get that there's some fear around that, and so I think part of honoring is respecting the space of life that they find themselves in, trying to understand where they're coming from. And so just understanding, right, that like that it's the first time that they've been this age, that they're figuring it out, that like what does society say about who they are as adults, right? Also understanding the cultural context of it, right? That like these are, right, like our parents are black people who have lived in a world that doesn't like black people, right? That and has liked them like less in their timeline than they have in ours, right? And so also being patient and understanding that. I think is a part of understanding their humanity, and then trying to figure out how to use those spaces to bridge the gap, I think, right? And being patient, which is a hard thing to do, particularly, right, when we have expectations of our parents that our parents aren't meeting. It's hard to be patient in that space, right? It's hard to want something and not get it because we expect, right, that as we've lived these lives in which our parents have provided so much for us, like we expect that like they should still be able to do that provision, that they should still be able to meet those spaces. So, so I think it's finding ways to be patient and to help establish the necessary boundaries. And if you can't find a space to honor them in the ways in which we understand their humanity, and you're still being met with disrespect, care is a boundary still, right? Yeah. Like we can, like, caring for them and honoring them is also saying this relationship is not working in the way that I think it should, and my love for you says that I have to hold you at arm's length because that's how I honor you, right? That like if I'm met with disrespect and I can't honor, respect, love who you are as people, then the best way that I can honor you sometimes is to create the distance long enough for me to really respect who you are as a person.
Yeah, because that word honor really is, take serious. Take serious. It is really God's command to Israel, and it's funny that you say, in our American culture, that we don't really value folks who are of a certain age, right? Well, which is the exact reason that God has to give the command, right? Honor your mother and father, because God understood that in 2026, in American culture and society, it is better, out of sight, out of mind. Let me just, whatever the most, basic of provision. It is also interesting, I think, for us to, if we turn the text, or at least our interpretation of it, when we see honor thy mother and thy father, all the onus is put on the kid. And there is never a command that is only one-sided.
Yeah.
Right? I know, when Paul talks about it in Ephesians, it's the first, it's the only command with a promise attached. I hear that. But there's never a one-sided command. God says, hey, don't have any other gods. Because God understands, right? God's not jealous because God is worried about competition. He's jealous because he wants what's best for us, and he knows he's the best thing, right? I need you to be holy, not just some arbitrary rule, but I need you to be holy because I'm holy. Honor your parents because your parents have done honorable things. And so, it's not a blanket call for parents to do whatever they want, and we just have to listen.
Yeah.
And that absolutely is not the case. So when Paul does bring it up in Ephesians 6, and he talks about, verses 1 through 3, is kind of the obey your parents because that's the right thing to do. I think that's what the New Living Translation says. It's the right thing to do, right? Honor your mother and your father, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that you may go, so that it may go well with you, and that you may have a long life in the land. Which is true, right? Which is why we can't just read the Exodus passage by itself. Paul is reminding us, hey, you take care of your parents, in part so that your kids see you take care of your parents, so that when you are old, they'll also take care of you. Right? It becomes this continued transfer. That's how you end up living longer, because you got somebody who is taking care of you. But then verse 4 says, fathers, don't stir up, and this is the Christian Standard Bible, fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. It is Paul reminding us that your obedience to your parents is really contingent upon their obedience to God. It is in the same way that Paul talks about wives, submit yourselves to your husbands. That's not blanket. Just one, it's not blanket. Women, submit yourself to any man, right? It's not that. And it's also, you keep on reading, Paul is talking about, hey, you submit yourself to the man who submits himself to God.
Yeah.
And so much in the same way, he is making the same argument for us and how we are to navigate our parents. Because God never calls us to be obedient to a disobedient parent or to a parent that's asking of us something that is outside of his will. So I would say we are not to provoke, as parents, we're not to provoke our children to wrath, but we are to develop and try to figure out how to develop healthy relationships. And then if that is not possible, I like what Paul says in Romans 12. I've been using it. I don't. I pray it in proper context, but when I'm done fooling with folks, it is, if possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody, right? Yeah. And so I'm like, you know what? Sometimes I'm like, well, it's just not possible, Jesus. I tried. Right? That some of us, some moments, then we just have to figure out. How to navigate and not engage in those types of spaces.
Yeah, and so I guess I'm curious to hear from your perspective. Like, has being a parent yourself helped you to understand how to navigate your parent-child relationship?
It has. I think in part because I want to have the kind of relationship with my parents that I want to have Malachi to have with me when he gets older, right? And so my prayer is, how do I not get so caught up in what I have going on and life for me to be able to. So I try not to be disrespectful in the true sense of disrespect, right? Not out of the false sense, but I try not to be disrespectful, and I try to navigate. And I think that what we can talk about, I think part of what we continue to discuss is navigating this parental relationship, because I don't know, and it certainly will have to be for next week. I don't know if we understand. The way that we understand our parents is the way that we also communicate with God, who is our ultimate Father. I've shared before, we have a member who came to me, almost 20 years ago now. Like, I have a problem with God the Father because my father was abusive, and so I don't know what it means for God, who claims to be Father, to love me in a nurturing way. That's not been my experience. So as parents, figuring out what we're modeling to our kids about who God is and how God shows up.
Yeah, that's good, and I think it's a good segue into our conversation next week, right? As we think about what it really means then to be parents to children who are young and children who are old, right? Because it's one thing, I think, for us to think about this as we are our children ourselves, and I wonder too how often it's harder for our parents to to be patient and understand like what it means, right? Because they forget their like parent-child relationship too, and like how they navigated it, or they felt like they had to fight for so much independence in their parent-child relationship. So now they are full authority in ours because they were never authority in their relationship. So it's an interesting kind of sandwich to be in. But I think part of what we have to also then deal with, right? We can't just be children who are bitter about the relationships that we have with our parents, right? But we have to think about, right, like what did our parents do? How did they try to do it well? What did they model? But then we also, right, as parents, have to think about then how are we navigating this next generation of children, and how are we parenting them to see something different? So that'll be our conversation for next week. Is for us to look at gentle discipline, right? Like gentle parenting. How do we, like, what does discipline look like in parent-child relationships? How do we navigate that space? So that'll be our conversation for next week.
Whew, man, it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for joining us. We will chat again next week, and before we go, I will pray us out. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for the opportunity to discuss your word. Lord, we thank you that you remind us that we are called to honor and to respect our parents, God, not just because you want us to do it, Lord, but because it pleases you, but it also helps us to care well for those who have come before us. God, we ask that you would help to mend the broken areas of our lives that keep us from being able to live well in